Our final speaker today is Jonathan Briggs, a botanist and ecologist who has had a long career working in nature conservation. Mistletoe has been a special interest of his for nearly 30 years, studying distribution, biology, conservation, control, and practical aspects of seasonal marketing and propagation. He has a paper reviewing current mistletoe issues due in British and Irish botany this winter, and his talk will be covering some of those issues. A massive virtual applause to Jonathan Briggs.
Okay, let me, am I on? I can't see myself. Yeah. Hello, right, good evening, or afternoon, or morning, or wherever you are. I'm going to romp through a lot about mistletoe very much from a British point of view, but there are lots of mistletoes around the world, so I will touch on other mistletoes as well. It's not as deep a technical presentation as the ones we've just seen. It's so a little bit more light-hearted than those, but I'm touching a lot of stuff, and everything I'm covering is in that paper that Natalie referred to just now, which should be, it's an open access paper, should be out in January. Here we go. Right. Now, mistletoe and Christmas. That's the key thing we're talking about. And of course, we all know about mistletoe and Christmas. We kiss under mistletoe at Christmas. It's a key part of celebrations and has been for as long as we can all remember. But what actually is it? It's worth, first of all, thinking about that kissing custom. It's really just a remnant of some very ancient traditions, and really was only made universally popular in the 19th century. We'll come on to that a little bit later, and it's still, of course, widely practiced today, pandemics permitting. The key question, though, of course, is what mistletoe? Because there are 1,500 odd species of them around the world, within the Lawranthaceae and the Viscaceae, which are now part of the Santalaceae, because we botanists love moving our plants around. So which one is the kissing one? Just a few samples of some that aren't. This is Phorodendron, which is a leafy mistletoe from the central southern United States. Very, very common.
Jonathan, sorry to interrupt, but would it be okay if you shared your screen?
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Am I not? It's working for me. I was assuming. I was assuming because. Let me go.
No problem at all. I thought you were just getting down to it. No problem. It's just when you said about this particular species.
Yeah, hang on. I don't know. Let me. Right. Okay. Sorry about that. I was assuming it was shared. Let me go back to.
So don't forget any questions that you've got in the chat, and we'll run through those at the end. No problem whatsoever.
All right. Okay. For some reason I'm not getting the right window. Oh, there we are. That's why I'm not getting the right window. There, that's better. Now, are you getting?
Yes, I can see your slides.
Right, good. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that.
That's all right. That's all right. Anyway, so where were we? Mistletoe and Christmas. It's a kissing custom, a remnant of ancient traditions, universally popular, but really that's a 19th century thing, and it's widely practiced. But which mistletoe are we talking about? There's 1,500 odd species worldwide. Lawranthaceae, Viscaceae, part of the Santalaceae. Which one's the kissing one? This one is one of the Phorodendrons. They're leafy mistletoes from the United States, and these are the ones that are used in the States for kissing under at Christmas, but they're not the right one. Then there are these. This is an example of an Acetobium. Where my big red mouse pointer is the entire plant. This is a picture taken in British Columbia a few years ago, and they are the so-called dwarf mistletoes, and they're certainly not the ones we kiss under at Christmas. Then there are the tropical mistletoes. There's lots and lots of mistletoes in the tropics and subtropics. This is a very pretty one, Tapenanthus sansibarensis. This is from mangrove swamps in Kenya. Then another African one. This is Viscom minimum, a succulent species which grows on succulent species. It parasitizes the succulent euphorbias in Africa. But again, we don't use that one to kiss under. Then there's, moving on into Europe, there's the red-berried Viscom cruciatum, which looks lovely and Christmassy with its lovely red berries. But of course, that's not the right one either. So these are just a few of the many you get around the world. There's a lot of South African ones, a lot of South American ones, a lot of Australian ones. But the one I'm really talking about today is what I would call the original one, the white-berried Viscom album of Central and Northern Europe. Now, that is a white-berried species, as it says here, and the custom began with this because it is so significantly distinctive. It's a very, very unusual plant. They're all unusual, but this is the one where the customs began. Now, the customs are odd, but there are so many of them. It goes back into prehistory, and you think, well, why? Well, there's several reasons why there would be odd customs. First of all, of course, it's evergreen, but it only grows on deciduous hosts. This particular species of mistletoe only grows on deciduous hosts, so that you see it reappearing every winter after the host leaf fall. So by the time you get to November in Britain, in our climate, you suddenly re-notice the mistletoe appearing. It has very distinctive.
Hi, Jonathan. Sorry, I don't think your slides are moving on the screen.
Oh dear. Now what's happening?
Oh, they've just moved now.
Where did you get to?
So we were just on the start, and now it's just jumped ahead to slide 9. Is that the one that you were?
That's the one I'm on. Yeah.
Okay, we'll try it from there then. That should be fine.
It's just frozen, sorry. I think it had frozen, but fingers crossed. Would it be okay if you tried going to the next slide now, and we can just double check if it's working?
I've just moved a slide on.
No, it's still on that same one for us.
What have you got? The spherical growth?
Yes.
Why is it not moving on then? How annoying is that? I tell you what, if I go off screen, I'll stop sharing and I'll start sharing again. And try that. What have we got now?
We've got the white berries now.
Okay, and if I go, no, it's not changing for me now.
It's just changed for us, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry about the technical. It happens to everyone, literally.
Yeah.
Everyone. So
okay, well, just running through that lot again. It's evergreen on deciduous trees. It's got a distinctive geometric growth. Every branch divides into 2 branches every year, but only divides into. That's the only division it does. So it's a very, very precise geometric growth. It is, of course, effectively doubling everything. A tendency with that growth, because it's doubling everything and everything's the same length every year, it will eventually become spherical. It's white-berried. It's the only white-berried native plant we have in Northern Europe. And those berries only ripen to whiteness in midwinter, which coincides, of course, with the plant reappearing. So if you add all that together, you've got an evergreen thing that reappears on your tree every winter. It's perfectly round. It gets a little bit bigger every year. It's got this strange branching pattern. And just as it reappears, all the berries turn white. It's not really surprising that it was something that was looked at by the ancient people as being significant. If you go back into legends and traditions in the past, are you still seeing changes in the slides? This is Aeneas in Greek myth, where he found mistletoe as a guide to get him into the underworld without being attacked. He was using it as a plant of protection. In Norse myth, we have a rather nasty story about the evil god Loki managing to get someone killed using mistletoe, but as a result of that, the goddess Frigga decided it would be a plant of love and friendship and never do any harm again. So that turned it from a plant of evil into a plant of good and protection. We have the Druidic myths, mistletoe being harvested from their sacred trees, and them holding the cut plant above the ground, catching it on a white sheet where they were cutting it so that it wouldn't lose its magic. If it ever touched the ground, it would lose its properties. What all of these things have in common are traditions to do with fertility, ongoing life through the winter months, the greenness on the tree, protection, friendship, peace, and luck. There's a lot of friendship and luck with mistletoe, and medicinal uses. We'll touch on those a weeny bit later. So it's those themes that led to the kissing custom, which is arguably just a distillation and simplification of all of the ancient traditions. But there's a great question over how the kissing tradition became so popular. No one really knows. In the early 19th century, it became a popular custom, just like Christmas trees and Christmas cards and Father Christmas and all those 19th century standardizations of Christmas. Mistletoe was one of those. It suddenly became popular. There's very, very little evidence of a kissing tradition across the UK, for instance, in the 18th century or earlier. It's only in the 19th century and later, and it was exported by us Brits all over the world. It's very much a British custom. It's not a French one or a German one, it's a British one. One of the odd things about it, of course, was that mistletoe, which is, of course, is a parasite of trees, as soon as you want it at Christmas, it's in demand and it becomes a crop. So you've got a hemiparasite of trees that it becomes a sought after crop at Christmas time. And this cutting is from 1864. I won't read it all in detail, but basically it's saying in the county of Hereford, there was an immense supply of mistletoe forwarded to Liverpool and Manchester, tons from Hereford, tons from Ledbury, tons from Leominster, tons from Ludlow, tons from Ross, tons from loads of other places. And a lot of them were sent to foreign countries. We'll come back to that. And there was a much greater demand than previous years. Now, the one thing to note from this is the Hereford bit, because those of us who are based in the UK will know that that's a particular corner of the southwest Midlands of England. And it's curious that all this mistletoe was coming from there. And the reason it was all coming from there is that that's where nearly all the mistletoe in Britain grows. Herefordshire, Worcestershire, and Gloucestershire are the growth areas for mistletoe. If you look at this distribution map, this is a distribution map from the 1990s National Mistletoe Survey. The dots are representing squares where mistletoe has been spotted. And you see down here in the southwest Midlands, creeping over into the Welsh borders and going down into Somerset, this massive block of mistletoe, continuous mistletoe, whereas in the rest of the country, it's just scattered about. Hardly any in Scotland, hardly any in Wales, and I haven't put Ireland on because there's hardly any in Ireland. Nearly all of the mistletoe in Britain is concentrated in this one little area, but there are colonies everywhere else. Now, it likes this area for climatic reasons. There's lots of other factors we'll come on to in a minute, but it's interesting to speculate that it's probably always in the post-glacial times like that area for climatic reasons, and therefore all of these scattered bits across the rest of England are probably not really wild populations. These are probably remnants of the 19th century fashion for wanting mistletoe. People wanted to grow it as well. So these are all plantings effectively, which have spread short distances in the last 50, 100, 150 years. Whereas down here in the southwest Midlands, it's always been there. One of the reasons it does like it there particularly, but this also applies to the rest of the country, so it isn't the only reason, is that there are so many old apple orchards in that area. And Viscom album, our species, loves growing on apple trees. It also loves growing on trees that are spaced out. It's not a plant of woods at all, mistletoe. It's a plant of trees with space around them. It wants light. And so apple trees in orchards and indeed in gardens are ideal. So in the Herefordshire, Worcestershire, Gloucestershire area, it grows freely in orchards and gardens. These bar charts are from the 1990 survey again. In the 1990 survey, nearly 40% of mistletoe in Britain was seen in gardens, just over 20% in orchards, 15 or so % in parkland. So these are all open habitats. If you look at the host preference, the same survey, nearly 40% of mistletoe in Britain was recorded on apple trees. And you can extrapolate those two things together and say, well, yes, those apple trees were the apple trees growing in the gardens and the orchards. Its second preference is lime trees, Tilia, and nearly 20% was on Tilia in the 1990s. And of course, parkland is full of lime trees, and so are roadsides, this habitat here. So lime trees are very, very popular parkland and roadside plantings. So you can see how, where this mistletoe, the hosts are growing in these particular habitats. Note also, by the way, that these are very man-made habitats. It's interesting to speculate on how much less mistletoe there would be if it wasn't for gardens, orchards, and parkland. So this is where the Christmas crop has traditionally in Britain come from, and still does to a large extent. Traditional apple orchards, this is me up a tree, pruning mistletoe out with a long-handled pole, and this is the traditional mistletoe auction at Tenbury Wells in North Worcestershire, which is still ongoing. That is the trade in mistletoe for Christmas. But it wasn't quite as simple as all of that. If you go back into the history of the trade and start looking into what was happening with mistletoe, this is a 1938 press story. It's about a florist called Mr. Johnson, who was a specialist in mistletoe supply, and he was mainly getting his mistletoe from apple orchards, but he sent his mistletoe to London middle of November to send it off to Australia and South Africa. He wasn't supplying Britain at all. He was supplying, for want of a better word, the colonies. He stopped in December because French mistletoe started coming over. So we weren't supplying mistletoe to Britain from the Southwest Midlands. We were possibly supplying the colonies, and Britain was getting its mistletoe from France, which seems very bizarre. But you go back again into time, this is the 1890s now. The quays of Saint Malo are covered with immense crates of mistletoe for decoration of English homes at Christmas, and that is a big trade, and it still is a big trade. You look back into the old press cuttings of the time and look at some of the press photographs. This is a picture from the 1930s showing mistletoe harvest in Normandy, stuffed into these open-sided crates. This is a press picture also from the same period of open-sided crates full of mistletoe at Southampton docks. And here we have the same open-sided crates of mistletoe arriving at a railway station in London. So we have this extraordinary trade of mistletoe coming into Britain from abroad, whereas Britain was sending its own mistletoe further abroad. A very, very strange scenario these days. But I wanted to move on from that to cover a few particular points about mistletoe today before we finish off today. I'm starting with harvest and trade again, but just bringing it up to date. We still harvest from those old orchards in Britain, and we still do supply a lot to ourselves. We no longer send it to South Africa and Australia. So this is the Tenbury Wells mistletoe auctions as they currently work. We had 2 of these a fortnight ago. The Druids always get worried about them because the mistletoe's on the ground has lost its magic, but we have to live with that. Most countries these days don't try and import their mistletoe from Britain or France. They use local species. So going back to those phorhodendron species in the States, they're evergreen mistletoes. They got white berries, but they're not quite right. They haven't got that beautiful symmetry that Viscom album has. Demand in general has fallen off a bit, possibly because of the widespread use of plastic mistletoe, which also, of course, lacks the beauty of Viscom album. And most recently, of course, demand in the last 2 years has been questionable because it is difficult to kiss with a mask on. So there are some problems in the mistletoe trade at the moment. Very quickly moving on to other things, we think in Britain mistletoe is on the move, and indeed in Europe. Climate change modelling suggests it should be moving further east. The green dots here are the modelling changes. I haven't got time to go into this in detail. And indeed, in Britain, at least, we are seeing what appears to be more mistletoe in the east than there used to be, and spreading faster in the east. So it may be that concentration in the Southwest Midlands. Fast forward a few decades, it might be over where Natalie is in East Anglia. So some interesting things going on. It may not be due to climate change, though. Another very interesting biological factor here is the bird vectors. Mistletoe in Britain is spread by only a handful of birds, and one of the most efficient mistletoe spreaders of Europe is a thing called the blackcap. But blackcaps only breed in Britain. They don't overwinter, so they don't spread mistletoe berries, except that in the last 3 or 4 decades, a load of European blackcaps have started overwintering in Britain. So we suddenly have thousands of blackcaps in Britain overwintering, and they are the most efficient mistletoe vectors we have, and we didn't used to have them. So we may be seeing changes in mistletoe distribution simply because we've got a cleverer bird present. It's very interesting to speculate on how these things are working. Moving on again, we also have problems with too much mistletoe. Back in the 1990s, we worried that the loss of apple orchards was leading to a loss of mistletoe, and I turn that on its head these days when I talk to people. A lot of our old apple orchards have become neglected. Where they support mistletoe, the mistletoe has been left unmanaged, and the mistletoe is now slowly killing the trees off. So it's not the apple orchards, loss of apple orchards leading to loss of mistletoe, it's too much mistletoe leading to the loss of apple orchards. In contrast, in much of the rest of the country where there's less mistletoe, a lot of people are growing it deliberately, largely for conservation reasons. It supports a variety of insects, as indeed many of the other species do worldwide. And some very interesting research, mainly on Australia, on Australian species, has shown that they can be keystone species, which support more than just the direct species. They are indirect habitat and indirect food. Even just the leaf litter under mistletoe is indirectly benefiting other species. So there's a lot that could be said for mistletoes. Sticking back to Viscom album again, medicinal value, because it is a toxic plant. A lot of people are even nervous of handling it because they've been told it's toxic. But you go into continental Europe and you can buy it in any pharmacy and drink it as a herbal tea. It's not that toxic. On the other hand, when you look at the toxins that are in it, you find that they are cytotoxic lectins, very similar structure to ricin, which is notoriously poisonous. And one of the mistletoe lectins, Viscum, also known as ML1 or mistletoe lectin 1, is now prohibited under the UK Anti-Terrorism Act, and I think also in the States under the federal act there, Viscum is banned. So if you distill the mistletoe down too much, someone might think you're a terrorist. Other aspects of mistletoe in medicine are the complementary cancer therapy, which is incredibly popular in Germany and in Austria, but not widely used outside those countries. Very, very interesting concept because it's very much to do with Rudolf Steiner anthroposophic principles. And a lot of people believe very, very deeply in it. Equally, a lot of people don't. There's some very interesting controversies with mistletoe medicine. And then I'm going to finish in a second because we're moving rapidly out of time, but I want to put this one in because this is one of the weirdest ones. This has only been discovered in the last 5 years. Mistletoe lacks, Viscom album lacks complex 1. Now, if you know your cell biology, complex 1 is needed for the first part of the 5-stage process of cellular respiration. And if you haven't got complex 1, your cells can't breathe. And yet, mistletoe Viscom album doesn't have it, and yet it still survives. It's the first time it's ever been found to be absent from a multicellular eukaryote. So there are some very odd things that go on with mistletoe. I'm going to leave it there, but I'm going to stress that a lot of the issues that I've touched on, I've only very touched on nearly all of them, are covered in this new paper which is coming out in British and Irish Botany. It was due to be out before Christmas, but there's always delays. But it's open access, so you'll be able to find it at britishandirishbotany.org. Also, next year, within the next 6 months, I hope, we'll have the biological flora out, which is a more detailed account of Viscom albums detailed biology in Journal of Ecology. So there's a lot to read up about mistletoe in the next few months. And that's all I've got to say for now.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you. I've got to say, there might be a third reason that mistletoe has been moving east. So I'm actually from Tenbury Wells, and in my high school, in my secondary school, we had a mistletoe queen, but I have now moved to the east. So it could be that the mistletoe is just following me.
Well, yes, it might well be. I mean, you Tenbury people, you do spread it about, yeah.
It genuinely is massive. Where I'm from. So no, thank you very much for such an interesting talk today. And we've got some questions already coming into the chat. I personally was wondering, what are some opportunities out there for mistletoe? Do you think it would be a good thing for us, or would it be a bad thing for us if the demand increased? Say, for instance, a load of films came out with people kissing under the mistletoe. Would that be a positive mood for mistletoe, or do we actually not want that to happen?
I don't. It's an interesting question, because it's difficult to know what is the best thing for mistletoe. I mean, in terms of as a species, it's doing, Viscom album is doing fine. There's no the people often think, because back in the 90s we were worried about mistletoe's survival. A lot of people think we're still worried. We're not. Mistletoe's doing very well. Too well in some places, but not well enough in others. And so I think the main argument for promoting mistletoe kissing more, and perhaps doing the sort of thing you're saying, having films of mistletoe, is to promote sustainable management. That's the thing we're missing. Over in the Tenbury Wells area, where we've got some of those really neglected old orchards that have got too much mistletoe, they haven't been managed enough. What people need to do when they've got mistletoe, and this, you see this in the States as well, because mistletoe is an economic pest, is a much bigger issue in the States than over here. That sustainable management, cropping it every year, is a good thing. So if you've got mistletoe in your garden or on your orchard trees or whatever, and you want to keep it, you want to keep the mistletoe, but you don't want to have too much, you don't have to have little, crop it every year, but don't just crop it. Cropping it in Britain anyway, because Viscom album is dioecious, male and female are separate plants. People tend to do the really, you can't blame them for it. They cut out some of the stuff with berries on, and they think, oh, I've got some nice mistletoe to hang up at Christmas, and they leave the stuff that hasn't got berries on. And you find that 10 years down the line, they've got a tree covered in male mistletoe, because they've never cut the male stuff. What you need to do is always cut an appropriate amount. So what we should be doing is promoting sustainable management, promoting sustainable harvesting. And sustainable harvesting is actually harvesting the bit of female you want to hang up, but also harvesting the bit of male that you want to chuck away.
And I can see why, why people would do that. I think, people don't necessarily know, they just want what they see on the TV, I guess, and they don't know the science behind it. We have had a question about the toxins. Are the toxins located in the leaves, in the berries, or in both?
In both. You'll find the concentrations of them vary different parts of the plant, different parts of the year. So it is a very variable thing. So there's no perfectly safe part, and there's no perfectly dangerous part. One of the interesting things about the herbal tea, for instance, is that that's usually presented as a dried tea, and I suspect some of those complex proteins, those lectins, may be denatured in the drying process. So they may be taken, the sting, if you like, of those lectins may be removed in drying. I've never seen any research on that. Almost certainly the Germans have done some, because they've done lots of work on this sort of thing, but I haven't seen any in English language on what does drying mistletoe reduce the toxins. Okay,
thank you. And we've got a question about what is it rich in? So, for instance, is it rich in vitamin C? Do you know?
Well, it is certainly quite a good. This is another odd thing about it, which is quite controversial. It's actually potentially quite good as a forage crop. A lot of farmers will not let their animals eat mistletoe because of those toxins, and there are lots of stories about if you get the animal at the wrong time of year, or eats the wrong amount of mistletoe, of sheep, flocks of sheep, for instance, who may abort their fetuses because they've eaten mistletoe. It won't kill the sheep, but it might have an impact on the reproduction. But there has been historically, if you look at the records going back into some prehistory reports, that it was used as a fodder crop, and indeed there has been research, particularly in Eastern Europe, on Viscom album and using it as a fodder crop, actually harvesting it to feed to ruminant animals, because as a general rule, it doesn't do them any harm. You can demonstrate this easily by looking at if you chop some mistletoe out of a tree and leave it in a field, and go back 3 days later, it's all been eaten, usually by deer. But if there are sheep there, I mean, I've been chased around field by sheep because they want. I chop it over Tenbury Wells area. You chop the mistletoe out. You're up the tree, chopping the mistletoe out, and you're dropping it down to the ground, thinking you're going to pick it all up when you've finished. And when you get down to the ground, you find half a herd of sheep eating it, because they think you're cutting it for them.